Hi everyone, my name is Ben. Welcome back to another video on the channel regarding Animal Farm. This one is going to be looking at chapter 2 specifically. So, contents of this chapter of the video that we're going to be focusing on, the pigs, they come into the fold a lot more during this part of the story. The revolution itself that we get, so we'll talk about the context regarding that, how that plays out, the aftermath of that as well. One of which being the 7 Commandments, which is really key, really important to the entirety of the story, how they get twisted and turned to fit whatever agenda the pigs have. So, the pigs. The work of teaching and organising the others fell naturally upon the pigs, who were generally recognised as being the cleverest of the animals. This is really interesting. This idea that it falls naturally upon the pigs. Once again, the theme of intelligence is really big in this novel. It was big in chapter 1, it's big now as well. This idea that these pigs are clever, and that is what enables them to be teachers, organisers. The phrases teaching and organising are really quite pleasant and polite ways of saying ordering and instructing. These words are synonymous with authority, but they're phrased in a way, especially at the start, which is very endearing. You know, teaching, organising. So these are the main 2 pigs for the majority of the novel, or the first half at least. We'll come on to Squealer after this, but these are the main 2, at least for the first half, which are Napoleon, who is representing Joseph Stalin, and Snowball, who is representing Leon Trotsky, who basically was Stalin's main political opponent. Supposedly they come from the same branch of thought, but they were political opponents nonetheless, and it was Joseph Stalin, spoiler alerts, who ended up getting the upper hand, and he actually had Leon Trotsky assassinated. Napoleon is described as large, rather fierce-looking, with a reputation for getting his own way. Snowball is described as more vivacious, quicker in speech, and more inventive, but was not considered to have the same depth of character. These are obviously descriptions that are tailored towards Napoleon and Snowball, but because they are representing Joseph Stalin and Leon Trotsky, you know, we can assume this is kind of how, or this is how they were perceived by the Soviet people, or by people in general. Next up, Squealer. Squealer is not a representation of one specific person. You probably covered this in class. He is a representation of Soviet propaganda in general. Okay, he's a representation of the media. How the media can be manipulated by leaders in order to suit their agenda, in order to deceive and manipulate the people. So Squealer is described as a small, fat pig. Very round cheeks, twinkling eyes, nimble movements, and a shrill voice. A brilliant talker, very persuasive, and he could turn black into white. Now, these descriptions are intentional, okay? They are deliberate, very deliberate. The choice of adjectives are extremely purposeful. These words, twinkling, nimble, shrill. Twinkling has this element of distraction, right? Something twinkling, something that makes you forget what's wrong, and you want to go for whatever object it is that's twinkling. It's a very intentional choice of adjective. Nimble. If you're nimble, if you're agile, you can get around quite easily. You're flexible, you can move around, dodge stuff. But obviously we can think about what that might represent, and that is kind of like this idea that the media and people who use the media are conniving. It's slippery. It's intended to get around issues and make everyone feel better, right? That's what Squealer does. He tries to get around any concerns, issues that any of the animals might have, and he always somehow brings the topic back to how great Napoleon is. So he's nimble with movements, but also with his speech. Then shrill, a shrill voice, something you can't escape. It's very piercing, it's very loud, high-pitched. It's a voice that you really cannot avoid listening to. It's unavoidable, it infiltrates your ears. These are very purposeful words that Orwell has chosen. And then we've got this last ending metaphor to Squealer's Squealer's description, turn black into white. A metaphor to emphasize how persuasive and deceitful he is, right? Someone could turn black into white. It's one extreme all the way to another. But then also, it's not black and white. That's the double entendre here as well, right? You might hear this phrase when people are debating about topics or subject matter, you know? It's not a black and white situation. It basically means there's not one obvious answer here, right? It's not this or the other. There are nuances, there are elements of both sides of an argument that can be true. And that's why it's an interesting double entendre, because not only are we saying he's really persuasive, he can turn stuff from one absolute to another, it's also playing on this idea of stuff being black and white. Because in Animal Farm, especially at the start, they want everything to be absolute. All humans are bad. All animals are good. Everything is absolute. There's no room for nuance. There's only room for black or white. So it's an interesting choice of metaphor as well. Next up, we've got who the pigs don't like. Right? Who don't the pigs like? And at this stage of the novel, it's these two specific characters they really don't seem to take to or become frustrated with. One of which is Molly, who is a female horse. She's associated with sugar and ribbons. Those are the things she loves, right? She has materialistic values. She wants sugar, she wants ribbons, which Snowball and Napoleon and the rest of the pigs try to distract her from. They try to deter her away from desiring those things because they are the mark of humans. And the revolution offers little personal benefit to her. You know, she's happy to move with the people. She gets excited, but it doesn't offer anything particularly outstanding when her main values are things like sugar, ribbons. We talked in the last chapter, or the last video, about chapter 1, about how she kind of represents this materialistic, privileged middle class who at the time were able to either leave the Soviet Union or live in the Soviet Union peacefully. So she has that sort of privilege to get out when she wants to. Then we've got Moses, the raven, who preaches this idea of Sugar Candy Mountain, which represents heaven. Moses himself represents sort of organized religion. And the reason the pigs don't like him is because if all the animals suddenly focus on this comforting dream of, you know, all being able to go to Sugar Candy Mountain, they're less likely to engage in rebellion because they'll become content knowing that, our lives are going to be fine. We're going to have a nice place to go to when we retire, Sugar Candy Mountain. That's not in the best interest of the pigs because that would mean they are less desperate to rebel. Very interesting to see how the attitude of the pigs towards Moses changes towards the end of the book, right? They become actually quite happy for Moses to go around preaching Sugar Candy Mountain because eventually the state of Animal Farm led by the pigs becomes just as bad, if not worse, than the Manor Farm under Mr. Jones. So they end up needing Moses to talk about Sugar Candy Mountain in order for the animals to be content and satisfied and not rebellious. So, the pigs, who do they like, right? They dislike Molly and Moses. They do like, at this point, Clover and Boxer. And that's because Clover and Boxer are mouthpieces for the pigs, right? They are used by the pigs as authority figures who can spread the messages, right? They're very obedient, but they're seen or viewed by the rest of the animals as people to look up to. Clover, in the last video we did, is described as motherly. Here they're both described as the most faithful disciples. This religious imagery of disciples is very interesting. When we think of disciples, we think of followers of Jesus Christ, right? Jesus' disciples. In this instance, it's more about people who will follow obediently. Having accepted the pigs as their teachers, already they've accepted them. They absorbed everything that they were told and passed it on to the other animals by simple arguments. Because remember, the rest of the animals aren't very smart. Clover and Boxer aren't very smart, but they can pass on the messages with simple arguments, and everyone kind of understands and is happy to listen to the trusted horses, making them mouthpieces for the pigs. So let's look at some context of this revolution. So the revolution against Mr. Jones, this is a direct representation of the Bolshevik revolution against Tsar Nicholas. We talked about Tsar Nicholas in the last chapter video that we did. If you want to check that out. He obviously represents Mr. Jones. It's the old regime, the old government format that Russia had. So the leadership of this revolution was led by the Red Army and even Tsar Nicholas's own guards, which is very interesting. The Red Army was founded by Leon Trotsky, which is very interesting to take note of as well, who obviously represents Snowball. And yeah, the revolution of Manor Farm goes very well for the animals. It's successful because the animals use their physical strength. They attack everyone. They use their physical strength. This is interesting, right? Because later on, when the reader can tell that they need to rebel again, because the pigs are worse than Mr. Jones, or just as bad at least, this physical strength is something they, 1, forget they have, / forget to use, don't realise they need to use, and number 3, are too weak to use. All 3 of these points apply. All 3 of these points are absolutely true. This idea that they forget they have and forget to use. The animals are really unintelligent, apart from the pigs. Most of them, that is. Therefore, while it seems implausible to us as readers that how can you forget how you did the last resistance? As a result, an ongoing build-up of lies by the pigs, perpetuated by Squealer, perpetuated by the horses unintentionally as mouthpieces for the rest of the animals, telling them to keep going. All this manipulation, whether intentional or unintentional, means, unfortunately, it is very likely they forget to use this physical strength. They forget how they did the first revolution. Second reason, they don't realise they need to use it. I think this is probably the most important one. They don't realise they need to use it in front of the pigs. It kind of goes hand in hand with the fact that they've forgotten. They're constantly told that the pigs are great, that Napoleon is the best leader ever, everything's swell, everyone's working 300 times more productively than they were under Mr. Jones, because once again, they are unintelligent, they don't have the capacity to question anything. To them, that's all true. They don't realise that actually they are in a worse position than Mr. Jones. They don't realise they're being manipulated, and therefore they don't realise they need to use their physical strength to do anything, unless they're told to. And then number 3, they're too weak. This is something that is like less obvious, but when you really think about it, it's very plausible, very important to talk about, very realistic. These animals are surviving off just as little food, probably less than they were under Mr. Jones. Do they even have the physical strength? Especially after all the work they've been doing as well, working tirelessly on several windmills. Do they even have the physical strength? So these things are all important reasons as to why they don't rebel. As frustrating as it is for the reader, these are the key reasons why they don't rebel. Next up, we've got possessions. This is much to do with the aftermath of the revolution. The animals burn all weapons of torture and control. And this is a good quote. All the animals capered with joy when they saw the whips going up in flames. It represents them saying goodbye to the regime of Mr. Jones, burning all the things they associate with control and power, like chains and stuff and whips. However, the burning of possessions goes beyond just harmful items. This is where we get back into the talk of how absolute the revolution is. And this is a good quote to remember. Anything which is the mark of a human being, which extends to things like Molly's ribbons, they have to go. Snowball, Napoleon, the pigs, they are not happy with anything resembling human or humanity existing in that farm. They want it gone. And this kind of like goes beyond common sense, right? The absolutist manner of the revolution leaves no room for nuance. This is a really important moment. When Boxer heard this, he fetched the small straw hat which he wore in summer to keep the flies out of his ears and flung it onto the fire with the rest. There is absolutely no room for anything human-made to be on that farm, even things that are objectively useful to the animals. So for Boxer, his small straw hat helps him work. It helps keep the flies out of his ears. It is a genuinely useful thing, not for harm, not for control, practical, pragmatic use only. But the sheer fact that it's made by a human is enough for them to want to burn it. Boxer, without question, right? As soon as he heard it, he fetched the hat, he puts it on the fire. So this shows two things. There's no room for nuance. The revolution is absolute at this stage. Anything to do with humans is a big no-no. The second big thing we learn from this is that Boxer is 100% obedient. He never questions anything. He is solely there to obey and be a good worker. Despite his strength, he is willing to get rid of something that benefits him objectively. And the verb flung just shows how careless it is as well. There's not a moment of hesitation where Boxer might think, do I want to get rid of this? It's really helpful. He treats it just like the chains, just like the whips, without any question. And it's a very important trait of his character to note. And that is almost the most perfect moment you'll get in the whole text that demonstrates how obedient he is. So, the revolution, unity, beasts of England. This is what is sung before and after the revolution. It unifies animals through language and song. You see this in all sorts of real-world examples, even today. In the army, for example, when you see films that depict war and like training, army training, the soldiers sing these chants, these songs, as they do like marches. They perform certain chants sometimes, and part of this reason is to keep them committed. It's subconscious indoctrination. By the animals constantly singing Beasts of England, it subconsciously makes them, and maybe consciously as well, it makes them really determined to achieve the line in the song, this golden future time. The more they sing it, the more ingrained it is into their minds that they will achieve this. They're going to work together to achieve this. Once the revolution happens and it's successful, this golden future time has now become the present. And whilst it's a good song for keeping the animals united, keeping animals in the spirit of, yes, this rebellion is great, later on in the text, you see that the song gets banned because the song is about revolting when you are unhappy. That's what it means to the animals, right? Rebelling when you are unhappy, when things aren't right. And the pigs become worried that with how bad it's going on the farm, with how bad the situation is, if the animals keep singing that, they're going to realise that, oh, maybe we should actually rebel against these pigs. So the song, for now, is used for unity, but the moment the pigs' rule goes bad, the song actually becomes kind of a danger. Then we have the farmhouse as a symbol, right? All were agreed that no animal must ever live there. The farmhouse stands as a symbol of the oppressive rule of Mr. Jones. They look at that farmhouse, they see Mr. Jones's oppressive regime, oppressive rule. Notice how the words all and no are used in that quote. All were agreed, no animal. There are no exceptions. Everyone agrees. Then we have the commandments. Over the past 3 months, the pigs reveal that they had taught themselves how to read and write. This seems kind of weird. I think this is the first moment where you really get a sense of weirdness from the pigs. Why have they kept that a secret? What it does demonstrate is intellectual superiority. The pigs already have an upper hand because they know how to read and write. Once again, Orwell demonstrating how intelligence is incredibly important for being able to withstand oppressive regimes. If you don't have intelligence, you really are screwed. The pigs therefore have the power to establish the rules. Even if everyone agrees on the rules, which they do, sure, the pigs have this unspoken authority. It doesn't matter if everyone agrees on the rules, the pigs have written them, which means they can write the next ones. And by then you might not like them. But at that point it's too late because the pigs are in charge, because they wrote the rules. An unspoken leadership has formed. And the animals don't realise it because everyone agrees, everyone's happy. Why would we care if the pigs have made the rules? Because that all makes sense to us, and it's not humans making them, it's pigs. And yeah, this is illustrated super clearly as Snowball is the one who paints Animal Farm over Manor Farm. That makes sense, right? Because it's now the animals who own the farm. They take control of the farm. But no one agreed on that. He just did it. No say, no vote. And these are the commandments. I'll let you pause the screen to have a read. All of these commandments get twisted and turned in every way, shape or form you can imagine during the text. They all get manipulated and twisted because, guess what? Most of the animals can't read and don't memorize. They don't have the intellectual capacity to retain the information of these commandments. There's only 7, but they don't have the brain capacity to do it. And this is foreshadowed by this quote, "Cleverer ones at once began to learn the commandments by heart." There's no specific mention as to who the cleverer ones are, but we can assume it's the rest of the pigs, probably. And maybe Benjamin as well. But yeah, it foreshadows that the unintelligent animals are going to forget. They're not going to know what they are. And because they're not going to know what the commandments are, it makes them susceptible, vulnerable to manipulation and lies. If you don't remember something, someone has a lot easier of a job convincing you it was XYZ. It's going to be a lot easier to convince you if you just don't remember. Also, notice how each commandment is absolute in its language. Whatever goes upon 2 legs is an enemy. And then you've got a load of no's. No animal shall do this. No animal shall do this. No animal shall do this. No exceptions. And then the last one, almost the biggest one that you couldn't possibly think could be changed. All animals are equal. And by the end, this becomes all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. And at the start, you're thinking, well, that's so fair. All animals are equal. How could you even manipulate this? But they can. They can indeed. So there are potentially some religious connotations to these commandments. This isn't confirmed. If talking about this, I would use tentative language, which is making it clear to the examiner that you are not saying this is definitely the case, but it could be perceived this way. So words like potentially, could. But you could definitely make an obvious link, right? Commandments is obviously a reference to the 10 commandments, right? But this time it is the 7 commandments. 7 is an interesting choice. Why didn't Orwell choose 6? Why didn't Orwell choose 8? Who knows? But he did choose 7. And potentially that could be a reference to the 7 deadly sins. If the commandments are an obvious reference to the 10 commandments, could the fact there are 7 be a reference to deadly sins? There's a good chance. And that's because Animal Farm blurs the lines between good and moral commandments with evil and malice as the pig rewrite the commandments. A symbol of good and unity and collectiveness. At what point do they then become twisted and polluted so much that they are evil and malicious with malicious intent? And at what point do they enable the pigs to demonstrate particular sins? Sins like pride, greed, envy, gluttony, wrath. These are all part of the 7 deadly sins that the pigs demonstrate, specifically Napoleon. Gluttony, by the way, is, for those of you who don't know, the excessive consumption of things like food, drink, resources. It kind of goes with greed, to be honest, but excessive consumption. So the choice of having 7 commandments, is that a blending of the 10 commandments and 7 deadly sins? Who knows, potentially. I think there's a good case to make because of how specific the word commandments is and the number 7 is. So, the last part of the video, we're going to be talking about the chapter ending. This is my favourite moment of the whole text. Kind of a weird favourite moment, but it's my favourite moment. The reason this is my favourite moment is because it is the first major red flag for the reader. At this point, it's the first time the reader goes, oh my days, the pigs are a bit snaky. So at the end of the chapter, the cows get milked, right, because they're bursting to be milked, and they produce buckets of milk. And Napoleon says, never mind the milk, comrades, placing himself in front of the buckets. He owns it. That's his. He's defending his territory. When they came back in the evening, it was noticed that the milk had disappeared. This is an amazing quote. I would absolutely memorize this quote for my exams. First and foremost, it's the first major red flag for the reader. We notice that, oh wow, there's some deceit going on here. There's already a clear authority, a clear superior animal who are going to gain and take advantage of this rebellion the most, which is the pigs. The best part of this quote is the use of the phrase, "it was noticed," by Orwell. Orwell does this sort of stuff throughout the whole text. It's really brilliant. It's known as different things. There's different ways you can describe it. There's not one set language technique to call this, or narrative technique to describe this as. So you can kind of just say whatever sounds best. But in this instance, I would describe it as an impartial or a passive tone. Orwell never shares your outrage as the reader. When you're reading it, you're constantly thinking, oh my God, that's so terrible. And that's so outrageous. I can't believe the pigs have done this. But Orwell only speaks from the perspective of how the animals would be feeling in order to, number one, frustrate you, but number two, also show you how this is genuinely how the animals are thinking because of how unintelligent they are, because of how unaware, naive, ignorant they are. It was noticed. To us, we're screaming out at the book, the pigs have stolen it. It's an outrage. How could the animals not make this connection? To the animals, they just noticed it. It's as simple as that. It's as passive and impartial and unemotional as that. It was noticed. Very special choice of words. He does this throughout the whole text. Really plain, impartial, unemotional narrative that Orwell uses. It's really clever. And yeah, it frustrates the reader, but it's done to reinforce the naivety and ignorance of the animals. They really do have no clue as to what's going on. And that's the end of the video. Thank you all for watching. Hope that was helpful. We will continue with this text. Sorry, there was a bit of a gap between uploads. Hopefully the time between this coming out and the video on the third chapter will be a lot shorter. But we're going to work our way through these texts. Obviously, exam season is approaching thick and fast. So if there are any videos in particular that you would like me to make, any questions that you have, please drop them down below in the comments and I will address them as best as I can. Thank you for watching. Take care and I'll see you another time.